Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scot McKay.
How's it going, gentlemen? Welcome to yet another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. I am your host, Scot McKay. You can find me all over social media at Scot McKay, except for on Instagram, where I'm at Real Scot McKay. If you haven't been to the website lately, it is still mountaintoppodcast.com, as it always has. And gentlemen, more and more of you are joining us on Facebook at the Mountaintop Summit, the definitive group for men who want to be, well, better men, more masculine men, and attract better women in the process. Join us there. With me today is a new friend of mine. He comes originally from Minnesota, don't you know? And now he lives in the somewhat warmer, sunnier climate of Orange County, California. His name is Dr. Jeremy Zoch, and he's a doctor of health-related sciences and the author of a book called Life Lived Well, a collection of tips, insights, and inspirations to live not a great life, but your best life. Jeremy, welcome, man.
Thank you for having me, Scott. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, man, it's a pleasure to have you on, too. First of all, we were joking a little bit about this, in all seriousness. You are absolutely a PhD. You have your doctorate. Your doctorate is in an interesting field. You are a doctor of health-related sciences, and we were kind of going on a little bit before we started here about how that just has to confuse the bejeebers out of people, how you can be a doctor of health-related anything without being a medical doctor. So what is it you are an expert in, Jeremy? Tell us.
Yeah, I've been a healthcare executive, a hospital CEO, and chief operating officer for many years. And the PhD really helped to be able to make me a better teacher. And I've had the opportunity to work with residents and interns and also taught at USC for a number of years. And also from a research perspective, being able to kind of peel things back to figure out why they're working the way they are and what can be done to make changes. So that's why I wanted to pursue my PhD.
Well, you sound like a man who's passionate about that. And that's what we love around here is guys who know their stuff and really like to wrap their heads around a concept that maybe not everybody else is so into and, bring it to the forefront for us. And that for you led to authoring a book called Life Lived Well. And it's a collection of tips, insights, and inspirations to live not a great life, but your best life. And I'll tell you what, two things come to mind there. First of all, when I think of life lived well, I think of the definition of wisdom, which is by definition, a life lived well, right? Making good decisions, doing the right things, living your best life. Now, continuing on that theme, using the phrase your best life, I've got to be honest with you, Jeremy, is kind of trite nowadays. It seems like everybody's saying that. What is the difference between living a great life and your best life in the quest of life living well in your estimation? And does that indeed involve wisdom?
Yes, it does involve wisdom. And, to me, at a place in my mid-40s as a hospital CEO and, seeing my children grow up and, being in a, great loving marriage for a number of years, it felt like as I looked around, like so many things were going in the right direction. And, kind of went through my mind of, to do this for, 10, 12, however many more years and be able to retire. And there was a little part of me that felt like that was kind of settling in a way. And that was one of the things that kind of spurred this, especially on a trip to South Africa that we had about a year and a half ago. And it spurred it in a way to, what else could be really added to make what is a great life even better. And that's where I came back and really wanted to start with a passion for reading. There were other things I wanted to do. I wanted to get back into playing more music. I wanted to start playing tennis again and to really not feel like, looking back 10, 12 years from now and feeling like at a time where you could have made the very most of it, but instead kind of settled for it. So in many ways, I think what the book is and how it gets at that best life is leveling up, kind of being even more intentional, more present, and more engaged to really make the most out of this one life we've been given.
Yeah, I love that. And, Jeremy, you and I kind of share a similar thought process. Right before COVID, I was talking to my wife and we were thinking together. It wasn't just one conversation. It was really a process for us where we had built the life we wanted. We're location independent here. We're showing other couples, men and women, single men and women, how to find love all over the world, which is incredibly rewarding. We have had 2 more children together to go with the one each we respectively had before entering into our relationship. We'd put behind the obstacles of the past and started a worldwide virtual business that made us location independent. We were free. We were traveling the world. We were making a difference in the lives of people. And it was very easy, I said to my wife one day, to die here, to do this for the rest of our lives and keep doing what we were doing because it seemed like the right thing to do. It felt like the right thing to do. And we really didn't have any complaints. But it sounds like you came to indeed a similar thought process whereby, hey, you know what? Everybody is going to throw rocks at me and roll their eyes if I start, quote unquote, complaining about my status quo. It's like, oh, cry me a river, you poor baby. Kind of like Britney Spears crying on camera about how famous she was and she didn't have any free time anymore. Oh, poor baby, right? But there's reality to this, which is we get one life. We get one shot at this. And just because perhaps we get it right, in our 30s or 40s or maybe even our 50s, doesn't mean we're bound by some law of humility or something, right? Some principle someone thrusts upon us to stay there and die there and do nothing else, grow where you're planted from there. I mean, every time people build their quote unquote forever home, you know what I mean? I sort of cringe inside because I have this wanderlust inside of me that wants to do something else. Am I onto something here? Are we kind of kindred spirits there?
Yeah, absolutely. And, and I think that opportunity to continue to grow and expand. And, as I was writing, I didn't expect it to be a book I would share. I was just wanted to start from the beginning and share my stories. And it was really the insights and the learnings that I had through some of my most challenging times, as well as from mentors and people that took their time to go out of their way to help support me. Some of them intentionally supporting me. Some of them, it was just how they treated others that they were working with. And as you go through your career, to really take that same opportunity to help the next generation and really be able to be a leader and help prepare them as they're getting started in their industry and in their work as well. So I think that evolution from student to teacher, and for me, it's always being a lifelong learner. There's a lot there. And that's what came out and why I felt it was important to get a chance to share it.
As you're talking, I'm thinking about how my status quo doesn't necessarily only apply to where I'm living and what I'm doing for a living. Like, I'm a dating coach in San Antonio, Texas. So therefore I need to become some other kind of professional living in Arizona or somewhere, which is where we talked about moving. But there are a multitude of different angles, different facets to our individualism, to a life well lived, and different ways we can go with that. In our case, we went from traveling the world, you mentioned South Africa, which is wonderful, by the way, to really not getting on a plane much for the last 7 or 8 years and taking our kids around the country doing BMX racing. It was like a different chapter of our story together. So, yeah, we still live here in San Antonio. We're still doing the dating coaching thing, but other things have evolved. Other things have changed. We've brought 2 whippets into our family. So now we train racing dogs, and that will really throw a wrench in your life and give you a whole new lifestyle you didn't even really plan on 6 months ago. So this is an area where we not only probably can think out of the box, thinking out of our suburban sleepwalk, for example, which is a term I love to use. And these guys who listen to this show regularly have heard me use it. But what are some really unique, interesting ways that I can adjust what I'm doing, how I'm living my life, and have the net of it be a life better lived, right?
Yeah. And, in the book, I think really at its core is about being grounded and flexible. And one of the quotes that, continued to motivate me, I heard it a few years ago, was by Muhammad Ali, that the person that thinks the same at 50 as he did at age 20 has wasted 30 years of his life. And, that called out to me. to really, from a place of, what does it look like as you continue to evolve? And, as kind of a lifelong athlete, it was fun in your 20s. You could just go out and run. And the next day you could go out and run and do it again. And, if you wanted to go out and have a few drinks at night, you could still run the next morning. And I noticed as I got into my 30s that I had to start stretching a little bit. And then as I got into my 40s, the importance of nutrition and balancing other sports, getting into more cycling and swimming, those components became even more important. And what I liked about it is running changed for me. And it has that renewal with it. And so it doesn't feel like it's the same thing that I was doing 30 years ago. It's continued to evolve and change. And I think that to take that same attitude into relationships and with friends and family, and as you meet people, to have that same intention of bringing your best self, but then also having that openness to, as people change and as things change, to be open to evolving. It just helps you be where you're at today and be more present in an intentional way.
Yeah. You mentioned Ali's quote and being an athlete yourself. So my mind started thinking more towards sports. 30 years from now, if I'm an athlete, I'm thinking more like a coach, right? Or in my situation with the BMX racing that's been in my blood since I was 9, not so much a racer, but the play-by-play announcer for my kids' races. You can laugh if you want. It's kind of tongue-in-cheek to think that way, but there's an evolution to your purpose, even in the context of various constants in your life that you're passionate about. It's okay to remain passionate about certain pastimes or certain causes or things that are important to you, but your role in there may change. And that kind of is a nice segue to talking about what you mentioned about 5 minutes ago, which is this idea of moving from being a student to being an active participant in the grind. As Harvey McKay once said, you learn in your 20s and you earn in your 30s. A lot of people are left in their 40s wondering what happened, and I understand that.
Yeah.
But there comes a point where you need to pay it forward to people younger than you and do that with a sense of grace and a sense of not only responsibility, but dare I say pride about it, rather than saying, well, keep your hands off my stack. All you youngins are just going to come and try to take my job someday, and I don't want that. There has to be some humility here. There has to be the groundedness you talk about in order to become that mentor for someone else. And, when you kind of embrace that role, it's very fulfilling, isn't it?
It is. And, we've had the opportunity at our hospital to have, students that they're in graduate school and they've had some work experience usually, but it tends to be their kind of first hands-on experience in a hospital. And so for me, getting a chance to go through the hospital, take them on rounds, get a chance to show them, going into a patient room and meeting them and really building that relationship with the patient and then with their nurse, and seeing how in a hospital, it's really like, almost 30 or 40 different businesses all coming together, all centered around making sure that it's the absolute best care for each patient. And to kind of see them, the light bulb going off and that same passion and that energy. And then for them, by the time they finish, to be out doing their own rounds and building those same relationships and helping other teams, it re-energizes you. I think it helps make you a better leader, and certainly helps set them up for success as well.
Yeah, it's encouraging. It's invigorating to us to watch other people succeed because of our direct input. Jeremy, we had an entire show relatively recently with a gentleman named Nick Long, who's an Olympic BMX racer. First BMX-related guy I've ever had on the show after all these years. And the right guy, because he has gotten into his 30s, and BMX racing is a young man's sport. Don't let them tell you otherwise. Basically, most people would tell you it's a kid's sport. But he went to the Olympics twice, and he has a heart for teaching kids and training kids. And let me tell you something about having an aptitude for something and having excelled at it to the point where you've gained the respect of people. When you willingly pay it forward like that and give it away, not from a position of arrogance, like I'm better than you, so you all just better kneel down and learn from me, kneel before Zod kind of thing,
Yeah.
It's more, hey, I love this so much, I want to share it with you. I want to watch you succeed. It makes you beloved to people. It just makes you everybody's favorite person, and not to be overlooked. It makes you that person in the eyes of the very people who are passionate about what you're passionate about, doesn't it?
It does. And, I'm laughing. My son just turned 17 yesterday, and his one request was to learn how to drive a stick shift. And so I was able to borrow a vehicle from my friend of mine who,
I'm glad you were able to find a vehicle.
It's not easy.
Right.
You go into other countries and it's your only option, but here it's a lot harder to find. But, on Monday night, we had a chance just 2 days ago to learn how to drive a stick shift. And, and I do my best to teach, but I wouldn't say that I'm, uber fluent at it. And it had been a little while since we had been in Europe and I'd last driven a stick shift. And, he tried his best to be patient, and we did. We killed it at an intersection. And of course, it's the intersection where there's a police car on the opposite corner.
And a giant hill.
And it was flat ground, at least. It was flat. But, he flashed his lights and gave us just a heads up. But it also gave an awareness to the other cars around. And I think he had picked up what was going on. And, my son getting, quickly frustrated and said, here, you do it. You do it. And I said, I'm not switching seats. And he got it started again, killed it one more time, got it started again. And we made it through that intersection. And he kept going and said, I'm going to pull over. And I said, no, just keep going. And he continued driving. And then, we got home. And then last night, again, took it out. And it's just, to me, it was good to see something that the easy answer was to just get out, go around, and then be in the driver's seat. But I knew for him, he wasn't going to get back in that driver's seat after that. To me, the right answer was to continue and to have him learn and be able to do it and continue practicing. And so now, like I told him, now he's had a couple hours under his belt. He drives stick shift and he learns something new. And so I think to see it in his eyes that he now knows what he was doing and showing his cousin that he could drive a vehicle, it's great to see. So, it's an example of being able to kind of pass that along to the next generation, whether it's kids, friends, or others you're working with.
Hey, as the Mandalorian would say, this is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way. That's probably what I would say to my Star Wars file 16-year-old son if he started Breaking Bad with me during a driving event like that. I would probably just quote the Mandalorian. Now, I love it. And it isn't easy to be a mentor, and it isn't easy to be a student. But in order for the next generation to be trained up right, that's got to be what's happening. And maybe that's part of what's wrong with the world nowadays is everybody's looking for that easy button and expecting nowadays AI to do everything for them. And nobody really even sees the importance of a life well lived. Everybody's living vicariously through something electronic. It's kind of sad. Have you noticed that?
I have. And, and I think for me, when I had a chance to write, my story down, what I noticed was there were teachers that came to mind and there were coaches that came to mind that really, as I looked back, they were influential. And I think for many of the, people listening to this, if you really think about, what were those key events and key people that shaped it, chances are they're teachers, leaders, coaches that were in your life that made that impact. And I think today, carrying that on and what I've seen over the last, 7, 8, 10 years of my own life is having coaches has made an incredible difference. I had a life coach that really inspired me to actually get to know my health. And she inspired me to actually do it, to do a full Ironman triathlon. And I knew I couldn't do the swim. But I used my their swim coach, took lessons and got back in the pool and saw the video, firsthand of what that looked like. And also had to finally get a running coach. After failing on 7, 8 different attempts to qualify for Boston, I knew whatever I was doing wasn't going to get me where I was trying to go. But Coach Bob and his running program made an absolute difference. And so I think it's something as you go through life, you kind of feel like, you're done with coaches, you're done with leaders. But I've actually found it to be quite the opposite, that it's really invigorating and people are out there. They specialize in helping people at different points in their life really achieve their goals. And so if there's something that's been in the back of your mind or something where you feel like you're a little stuck, I encourage you, reach out and find that expert and, really pursue what's important to you.
I love that. You know, it's an old adage, but it's a good one, that there's no such thing as being stagnant. You're either growing or you're dying. And what is a life well lived if we're not constantly moving forward, learning, staying curious, which is a word that's been brought up in this context a dozen times in this show, and really just having that hunger to learn more and know more. I mean, life being a journey, not a destination. Yet another platitude, right? But you talked about being present earlier, and I know that's a major theme with you in terms of not living just a great life, but your best life. And a lot of people don't even know what that means. It's sort of bandied about by all these, you know, new agey guys. Oh, you have to be present. You know, you're too inside your head. And it kind of goes along with that sort of train of thought. But you have a unique spin on what it means to be present. And I would love for you to share that with us.
Yeah, I do think it's a big part of it. And, you know, my evolution of being present, you know, I continue to work on it as well. But for me, one of the earliest parts was I could tell when I came home after, you know, a long day in the office, and, you know, I could tell that I wasn't patient, you know, whether it was with the kids or, you know, with my wife. But, you know, I wouldn't mean to come home, and maybe it was just snapping or saying something quick. And then, you know, later it just, you know, I could tell, you know, it hurt people's feelings, and it was frustrating to me after feeling like I couldn't wait to get home. And especially during the pandemic, where all three of them had already been together all day, and you're coming home, was, you know, how could I do things differently? And so for me, it did start out with some meditation. And, you know, I grew up in a, you know, Christian environment, and meditation, you know, definitely wasn't part of it. But what I noticed as I started even just finding, and I was using the Calm app to just do, you know, 10 minutes of meditation a day. But I started to notice that I was finding that little bit of a space when I wanted to respond and say something quickly, that I would start to have just that space and that little pause to be able to be more intentional with my response. And so instead of saying something quite flip and off the cuff, to be able to take it in and then be able to respond. And I like that. And so one of the practices that I built up that is very important to me is just, I call it setting my morning intentions. And I have set them all over. If I'm in my backyard, and sometimes, you know, if it's a cold morning, I'll be in the house. And if I'm traveling, it's wherever that space may be. But it's really to take just a few seconds. And I just thank God for the day. And then I ask to just fill my heart, you know, with space and love and presence. And it's an intentional way. And then also to fill my heart with health and healing. And I do have a few people that I've been actively praying for as they're going through their treatments. And then also for my health, you know, to wake up and feel great. And many days to be able to wake up and start with exercise. That's a blessing. And then always at the end of that intention is to fill my heart with thanksgiving and gratitude. And I always look for three unique things. Sometimes they're things that have recently happened, or they're things that I'm looking forward to that day. But I found that just by starting your day with those intentions, that as you go into the office, like, I just feel like the day slows down. And I've even noticed on days if I don't set my intentions, where I get there and it just feels a little more frazzled. And so I think it's just a simple way that you can do to find your own space, even if it's just real brief, and then to be able to go forward. And I would recommend to you too, even if it's returning at night and coming home, maybe instead of maximizing that full time with uploading new information, just shutting off the radio or shutting off your sounds and just taking that 3 to 4 minutes and just, you know, preparing for, as you go into the house, how do you want to be? What's going to be important to you that evening as you're at home with your family, and being able to make the most of that time. So I think those are some real simple approaches that you can use.
You know, in today's modern and postmodern society, it's easy to think that the concept of meditation has been cornered by the Eastern religions, you know, Buddhism, Hinduism. But it is not anti-Christian to meditate. It's talked about in the scriptures a lot. And that quieting of ourselves is a humbling of ourselves. Instead of feeling like we have to take care of everything and it's all on our shoulders, it kind of rhymes with letting go and letting God. And as you were talking towards the end of your explanation of how meaningful this all is to you, Jeremy, you were talking about kind of preparing yourself before you go inside to be the best man you can be for those you love and to be present in your estimation. I think the next step, correct me if I'm wrong after that, at least this is what sprang to mind logically for me, is when you go inside the house, having prepared yourself as such, don't just go turn on the TV and tune everybody out. Whatever happened to simply having a discussion with your family, communicating with them instead of sitting around the television together, wordlessly munching on potato chips? You know, this is a lost art in and of itself, actually relating to people. And then these people grow up, want to get a girlfriend, these guys, you know, some of these younger guys listening, and then they wonder why they have nothing to say to her. And, you know, to be honest, I don't want to single these guys out. I mean, post-COVID, I think, you know, this kind of weaseled its way into a lot of people's lives, this idea of not knowing what to say to people, not knowing how to communicate because we're so out of practice. Or dare I say, we never even learned to because we were stuck in our electronics throughout our childhood or certainly over the previous several years. But wow, how amazing is it to actually communicate, right? Look them in the eye, talk, listen, share with those people who you say you love and you actually like. I mean, what a concept, right?
Yeah, what a concept. And to be intentional about it. I think one of the things that I'd heard for advice was to kind of, you know, and if you've been, you know, married and for a number of years and, you know, and you have that strong relationship with somebody, was to have sort of that business meeting where once a week, and that's what we do, is just, you know, to have that time to look at the schedule together. What are the overlaps? You know, if it is still, you know, you're working on who's going to pick up the kids that day and who's going to this event or that, to just have that kind of business meeting and the same check in with the finances if that's what's important, but do that work there. That then when you say, hey, can we, you know, go out for dinner or let's make dinner at home this night, it frees up the conversation to be about other things. So you're not kind of carrying the to-do list into those other conversations because you know that you're going to have that kind of time each week for that space. And I think it's something that's helped give us more time to talk about other topics and to talk about bigger picture things, to be able to, you know, what are our dreams, you know, for the next few years and what we're looking forward to this year. And the same as our family continues to expand now with one of our children being in college. So I think it's a really nice approach that, you know, that we've found that's worked well. And, you know, and as I've seen for men, you know, we love chasing things, you know, and whether it's for me chasing, you know, marathons and water skiing, you know, every month for as long as possible, you know, whatever it may be. But I would encourage you for the significant other in your life, you know, chase them. You chased them at the beginning, right? And I know for me, when I was pursuing my wife, you know, would do anything. And I think having that same attitude of, you know, chasing your wife, chasing your significant other, you know, and really pursuing them. How do you continue to look to make that relationship better, continue to evolve, just like you put that same energy into your other passions can be a really powerful way to do it.
Yes, and my perception listening to you is you're using the word chase in that context as a synonym for being intentional about wanting this to work, wanting to improve this, not being stagnant. And I can respect that greatly. For the record, chasing women around here is kind of a naughty word. You know, we choose instead of chase. So that's why I wanted to make that differentiation between what I think you're talking about and this idea of being needy and clingy and begging women to go out with you. And I'm sure that's what you meant.
No, I'm saying the same thing where the same energy. I wanted to qualify for the Boston Marathon, and it took a running coach and 650 miles of practice to take 3 minutes off. And that was something that was really important to me. And I had to focus on many things to be able to achieve that. And so for me, what I'm saying is just like I chased my dream of running the Boston Marathon, is to chase, meaning to really connect with my wife, to put that same investment into our relationship of making it the very best it can be. So yeah, just like a goal and a mindset in a very positive way. So thanks for clarifying that.
Oh yeah. It's coming from a position of strength and intention, not from desperation and neediness, obviously.
Obvious. Yeah.
Yeah. The culmination of everything in your book seems to be this idea of a life map. Now, we've heard you talk about being a little bit disruptive. Like I told you, I talked about in my program Unsettled a couple of years ago, which was about, hey, you know what? You could die here, do something different, do what it takes to get off a top dead center, get things moving, get some momentum in your life, lest we live that suburban sleepwalk that I alluded to earlier. So this idea of mapping out our life can sound a little bit rote or sort of pre-planned rather than spontaneous. And I'm sure a lot of guys are saying, okay, tell us, Dr. Jeremy, about this life map of yours, lest I start believing it might be a plan to stay stagnant for the next 20 years and grow where I'm planted, et cetera, et cetera.
And I think, the life map, and I really think of it, kind of your roots and, your foundation. And I had a chance. It was through a young couple's Bible study at the time. It was over 20 years ago. And we had an opportunity where they gave us 3 hours to go spend some time by ourselves and to answer some questions. Who are you? What can only you do? What are your dreams? To spend some time with those questions and to think about, for your life. And we all don't know if it's today's our last day or we're going to live to be 102. We don't know. But looking back on that last day on your life, what does that look like? And I would really encourage you to take some time with yourself and get a chance to really write it down of who you are. And it was from those early discussions that for me, and at the time it was to be the best executive I could be, to be the best father I could be, as I could see as, in the next very few months, I was going to be a father for the first time. Being able to do that in an intentional way and to be able to be the best athlete I could be, balancing that. And I've continued to come back to that list. And I do talk about in the book that, kind of looking at it in 10-year blocks can be really helpful. And then for each year, and as we just started 2024, it's easy to do some things that can easily get put off one more year, but to be intentional about what are the things that are most important that you really want to do this year and how you really want to be this year and really make 2024, the absolute best year possible. And so I think it is worth that time spending it and getting a chance to really, at a very foundational level, who are you? And spend that time of answering those questions, probably in, getting it down to 7-8 words of who you really are. And that's what I tried to build on in the book as well.
Yeah, whether you're being introspective, as you're talking about there. And I love the idea of drawing into your life map where you've come from and who you are now, not just mapping out where you're going in the future. I think when we hear the word map, we think of a journey that we're heading out on. That's why we pull out the map and try to figure out where we're going. But a map can also show you where you've been and where you are, right? That's what GPS is all about. Mm-hmm. So this is kind of like putting your life on a GPS, right?
Yeah.
So whether you're being introspective or like you talked about before, taking the time to relate to your spouse or your significant other or even a woman you're out on a first date with is so refreshing and such a forgotten art. And I love that you're helping us as men to get back in touch with that. I just think it's fantastic, and I'm so glad you shared that with us today. I want to point these guys to your book. It's called Life Lived Well, a collection of tips, insights, and inspirations to live not a great life, but your best life. His name is Dr. Jeremy Zoch, and he is a doctor of health-related sciences in Orange County, California. And when you go to my Amazon influencer storefront at mountaintopodcast.com/Amazon within the first few days of this show's release, you're going to find Dr. Jeremy Zoch's book right there at the top of the queue. And when you go to mountaintopodcast.com/Jeremy, this is the first Jeremy we've ever had on the show, you will go to Dr. Zoch's website, which is also very simply jeremyzoch.com. Jeremy, what are they going to find when they get to that website?
One of the things that I enjoyed putting together is because it's a collection of stories, and it has pictures that go along with the book, kind of a gallery that's included. And to me, it just kind of brings the book to life, sharing those stories and the stories, especially from growing up and from successes and challenges, to see those stories and then to give some insight, why intentionally the book was called Life Lived Well. it gives some more in-depth to that to really energize around that idea of really making the very most of this one special, unique life that each of us have.
Yes. And, when you get right down to it, everything we've talked about today kind of comes down to paying attention to that which is important, but not necessarily urgent, rather than just coming home, chowing down dinner, watching television, and living meaninglessly by default. And I love it. I love the work you're doing, and thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you'll come back.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Gentlemen, when you head over to mountaintoppodcast.com, check out our sponsors, Jocko Willink's company Origin in Maine, the Keyports, and also the guys over at Heroes Soap. These guys will make you look like a man, smell like a man, and be equipped like a man. Not necessarily in that order, but certainly our sponsors are all about highlighting your manliness, and they are the right sponsors for a show like this. When you use the coupon code MOUNTAIN10 with each of our three fine sponsors, you'll get an additional 10% off at checkout. And gentlemen, listen, it's 2024, like we talked about a little bit earlier on the show. Do you have the right woman in your life? It's 2024. Do you know where your woman is? It's kind of like it's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your children are? Well, you know what? We talked about what's important, but not necessarily urgent. And gentlemen, it's easy for you to say to yourself, I'll do it later. When I least expect it, the right woman's going to come along. Yeah, well, how is that working for you so far? Well, let's get on the phone and put a plan of action together, a roadmap, if you will, to you getting in front of the right women and being able to, yes, choose the woman who's right for you in your life, and you right for her also, by the way, and be intentional about making that happen. Get on my calendar at mountaintoppodcast.com and let's talk for about a half an hour and put a plan of action in place. All that and so much more is there for you at mountaintoppodcast.com. And until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.